Well, everybody, I'm Cantonese Cat. Hey, everybody, Cantonese Cat here. I'm going to talk about IWM. I'm going to talk about as to why I think miners are probably more correlated with IWM than with Bitcoin. What is IWM? It's the Russell 2000 ETF. It represents the small caps of the US stock market. And basically, what you're seeing here, which is extremely interesting to me, is that IWM or Russell 2000 is extremely sensitive to global capital. It's extremely sensitive to global liquidity. At the bottom here is M2 Global Liquidity Index. This is the aggregate, if you will, of the US M2 total money supply together with the other M2 total money supplies of Japan, China, Europe, and Great Britain. And it gives you this liquidity index. And generally, every single cycle, whenever you have a bear market, it enters a consolidation period where you have a resistance here for global liquidity, where you have a hard time breaking out. And that's when generally precipitated a bear market overall, right? Same thing over here. Whenever you have a hard time breaking above a resistance zone over here with global liquidity, you end up having a bear market where things just couldn't go up any higher. Same thing happened here in 2021, 2022, 2023 here. We have a hard time breaking above this horizontal liquidity resistance zone, and that's why you end up having a bear market that persisted for a very long time. What is very interesting, though, is that every once in a while, you end up having this V-shaped kind of recovery with a flush down. And this flush down here happened in 2016, this flush down here happened in 2020, and this flush down here happened in early 2025. During these flush down, you generally get a V-shaped recovery. Maybe we'll get the V-shaped recovery here as well. The reason why that V-shaped recovery happens is actually quite interesting. It's because during this significant drop of the IWM or Russell 2000 prices, global liquidity actually is going up during that time. During this drop here, during COVID, global liquidity is actually going up at that time. During this recent drop all the way from December 2024 all the way to April 2025, global liquidity was going up at that time. There is a big bullish divergence that happened during these kinds of huge, fast drop that scares a lot of people, right? And because of the increased global liquidity that I'm seeing here, I suspect that we're probably end up making a V-shaped recovery here, and that things, whenever it gets going, it can be pretty impulsive. Should it want to do that. Now, in addition to looking at global liquidity, I also want to look at just the pattern here. I was talking about a morning star pattern when you have a big red candle followed by like a little bit of indecisive candle here, followed by a bigger green candle over here. This is more or less a little bit of like a morning star look over here, but we're having a hard time kind of getting above this horizontal level. You can see how, if I do a weekly chart here, you can see how this horizontal level here means something, right? Resistance that we're currently facing was resistance here for almost half a year. It was also resistance here for a few months over here, right? It was also relative support over here for quite a period of time. So right now we're at a very, very important horizontal zone. How does that correlate with miners? What the heck am I talking about? Well, let's look at different miners. Let's look at Mara. Are we at a horizontal zone that is very important where we have a hard time breaking above? Yes, we do. Look at this horizontal zone over here, right? Resistance, support fit resistance. We're trying to push over resistance over here, and this horizontal zone seemed to be relatively important here, right? You look at CLSK, this horizontal zone that we're at right now, pretty important, right? Pretty important horizontal zone over here. It dates back all the way to even before 2020. Look at CIFR Cypher. You can see how a horizontal zone over here is also relatively important, right? Looking at Bitfarm horizontal zone over here where we're at right now, relatively important. Look at iron horizontal zone over here. We actually broke above a very important horizontal zone. I actually think that iron is a little bit outperformed, but 0.618 was that horizontal zone that was very important to break above. Wolf, where are we at? Horizontal zone, right? At resistance, right? BT, where are we at? 0.332 horizontal zone over here. Very important zone, right? Even dates all the way back to 2020 here. Riot, very important horizontal zone. I don't even need to draw lines for this. HUD 8, 0.5, very important horizontal zone, right? Cores, very important horizontal zone. BitDeer, very important horizontal zone, right? I can keep going on example after example. Even if you look at the WGMI, which is the ETF for miners, you can see how it also is at a relative important horizontal zone over here. when all these different miners are basically behaving more or less very similarly to what IWM is doing. Look at IWM, just eyeball it, look at IWM here. And then look at what I generally have to chart the most, Mara, right? Very similar market structure here. I also want to show you some similarities here between IWM and the miners, which is why I think that the miners won't really truly break out until IWM is really making its all-time highs. Is that going to happen? Well, we'll see. Monthly chart here. We're going to pull up the Bollinger Band, which gives you the 20-month moving average. You see how that's resistance right there, right? 20-month moving average is resistance, right? Let's look at different miners here. Look at Mara. What do we have here? We have, well, not the Ichimoku, but you have the 20-month moving average as resistance there, right? Look at Clean Spark. What do you have? 20-month moving average as resistance. Look at Cypher. What do you have? 20-month moving average as resistance. Bitfarms is not even getting there yet. It's a little bit too far away from it. Iron's an outperformer because it's reclaiming the 20 already. That actually is quite interesting, right? Wolf is an outperformer because it's already reclaiming the 20. BTPT, what we got here, a little bit far away from the 20, but essentially resistance up above. Riot, resistance up in the 20. HUD 8, relative outperformer, is reclaiming the 20 here already. So, and then also finally BitDeer, you can see how it's already reclaiming 20. That's also an outperformer here too. So you basically have all these miners more or less with the big ones that people generally follow as Mara, CleanSpark, Cypher. All these are basically still having the 20-month moving average as resistance, and you can see that with the WGMI, the ETF for miners, that's also with resistance, right? All these are behaving in a very, very similar manner. On top of that, you also see a morning star pattern over here, big red candle, indecisive candle, green candle, very similar thing you're seeing here on IWM, right? I was talking about that. Do you see that across different miners? You do. Mara, it's not a pretty morning star, but it's doing something similar. CleanSpark's doing something similar. Cyber is doing something similar. Bitfarm's doing something similar, but it's underperforming. Iron gives you a beautiful morning star here. Wolf gives you a beautiful morning star pattern. BTPT gives you a beautiful morning star pattern. Riot gives you a beautiful morning star pattern. HUD gives you a perfect morning star pattern. Course does give you a little bit here too. You can also see the same thing here in BitDeer, right? It's across different miners here. Even for WGMI, you see that as well. Okay. If you're looking at the weekly chart here, that also shows you a lot of very similar structure here in terms of where things are in relations to the 20-week moving average. You can see how it's either at resistance or it's trying to reclaim it from resistance to support here across the board. IWM currently is at resistance of the 20-week moving average, but it's becoming more flat. I think it just needs more time to kind of break above. And when it breaks above, then it probably end up gravitating up here to the upper Bollinger Band. It might end up challenging the previous all-time high here. But you look at what miners are doing. Again, WGMI ETF resistance, right? Mara, what is Mara doing? Mara at resistance. CleanSpark is actually reclaiming this a little bit of support. Cypher, resistance. Bitfarm, resistance. Iron is reclaiming that, right? It's an outperformer. Wolf is reclaiming that as an outperformer. BTPT, resistance. Riot, resistance. HUD 8, resistance. Cores, actually Cores is reclaiming that 20-week moving average, right? BitDeer, what is BitDeer doing? BitDeer is reclaiming that 20-week moving average here too, right? So all these miners are basically essentially doing very, very, very similar thing. And to me, if you're looking at just side by side here, I'm going to pause this here for a second. Now, look at here on the left is IWM or Russell 2000. On the right here is WGMI or the ETF for Bitcoin miners. They're basically facing very, very similar morphology here. There's really not that big of a difference between the two in terms of the market structure. Matter of fact, miners that didn't really have that huge liquidity grab like the Russell 2000 did, right? Actually, relatively outperforming the IWM here during this significant specific drop over there back in April 2025. But overall, the market structure is very, very similar. Look at Mara. Mara's structure is actually quite similar here too, between the two, right? Ever since the last cycle, between the two, they basically have very, very similar structure. Whenever IWM was challenged its all-time high, right, Mara is far from doing that. Whenever IWM ended up challenging the almost close to the cycle low over here, Mara is also a little bit far away from that, right? During the entire time, I think this whole thing right there was accumulation. I think this whole thing right here is a little bit of a crazy giant bull flag or channel down, if you will, just consolidating sideways for about 15 months or so. Whereas IWM has been slowly going up. And then I think this is wave one over here. I think this is wave two. For Mara, I think this is wave one. This is wave two. If what I'm correct, and I think that whenever it breaks above the all-time high, some crazy move is going to happen. That's going to be wave three, and I think that might end up triggering Mara to actually end up busting above and actually end up making a very good move here, right? All of this is assuming that global liquidity is rising. All of this is assuming that you have a reversal here with IWM, which I think is happening. All of that is assuming that my assumption that miners follow IWM more closely than Bitcoin is correct. All of this depends on what IWM is going to do. Anyway, I am done talking about this. I just wanted to let you know as to why you need patience with miners, even though Bitcoin just keeps on making all-time high after all-time high. Why do you need patience with miners? Because these are small cap stocks, and they're going to follow with a liquidity that goes into the global system more closely, whereas Bitcoin generally is a little bit of a leading indicator in terms of global liquidity. I think IWM looks like it's maybe a little bit lagging, as I was showing you, right? And because it's a little bit lagging, miners is probably even more of a laggard too. But I just want you to remember IWM, November 2020, all-time high, and it didn't look back since, right? Mara, November 2020, and it didn't really look back since. Clean Spark, well, they didn't really become a miner until really December 2020, so that's a little bit of a misnomer. The only other miners are Riot, November 2020. That was the God Candle, right? The other two miners are also laggards as well. Bitfarm was their last cycle during halving. And November 2020, just to kind of get going here, this is a major laggard last cycle. And another one that was around last cycle, November 2020, that was also a laggard and it became more popular later, was Hut 8, right? November 2020. So we really need to see that God Candle for IWM first, and then some miners are going to end up jumping off the gate and go up higher, and the other one's probably going to end up having a delayed, even whenever IWM is starting to kind of look exhausted here. The other miners could potentially end up just keep pushing up because of rotation. We will see whether or not this thing happens here anytime soon. I do not know when that's going to be. It could take maybe even a few more months to push up. I think the cycle is just a lot slower compared to before. And the reason why I think the cycle is a little bit longer than before is because look no further than global liquidity. Looks like global liquidity was really sideways here for a very long time, for about 3 years before breaking out. Here it only still sideways for about 2 years. Here it only gone sideways for about 2 years. So I think that might be why this whole cycle over here is lasting longer, and this is why we're experiencing a lot more people being a lot more impatient, and that's why the tourists are not here yet. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this video, guys. Have a good one. Bye.